Every now and then you come across a story that just stops you in your tracks. A story that seems to defy every logical explanation and really makes you question what you think you know about life, memory, and even death itself. Well, today we're diving headfirst into one of the most compelling and honestly unsettling cases ever documented. Pretty chilling, right? But what makes that line absolutely terrifying is who said it. This wasn't from some scary movie. According to her mother, those words came from a 4-year-old girl, Gillian Pollock, while she was comforting her twin sister. She was reenacting a terrible accident she should have no knowledge of whatsoever. And believe me, that's just the tip of the iceberg. All right, so to really understand this, our story has to start in a small market town in England called Hexham. We've got the Pollock family, John and Florence. They ran the local grocery and dairy delivery, pillars of their community. They had 4 sons, and their world was rounded out by their 2 beloved daughters, Joanna and Jacqueline. Just a normal, happy, bustling family life. Then, on May 5th, 1957, that ordinary world was just completely shattered. Joanna, who was 11, and Jacqueline, who was 6, were on their way to church with a friend. And out of nowhere, a car swerved off the road and hit them. The sisters died right there at the scene. And what makes this even more horrific is that it wasn't an accident. The driver, a local woman who was distraught over losing custody of her own kids, had done it on purpose. It was just an unimaginable, senseless loss. But then, a little over a year later, in the midst of all that grief, Florence found out she was pregnant again. Okay, so this is where the story starts to get really strange. The father, John Pollock, was a Catholic, but he also held this very deep, very personal belief in reincarnation. Now, that was highly unusual for Britain at the time. And in his grief, this belief turned into this powerful, unshakable conviction. He wasn't just hoping for another baby, he was expecting a miracle. John kept telling his wife, Florence, over and over again that Joanna and Jacqueline would come back as twins. Now, Florence was understandably skeptical. She found the whole idea pretty unsettling. And her doctors? Well, they were even more so. The entire pregnancy, they only ever heard a single heartbeat. They were sure, telling the couple to prepare for just one baby. But John, he never doubted it for a second. And get this, there was no history of twins in the Pollock family at all. So the odds were, pretty slim. About 1 in 250. So you can imagine the absolute shock in that delivery room on October 4th, 1958, when Florence didn't have one baby, but 2 identical twin girls. They named them Gillian and Jennifer. And for John, this wasn't just some crazy coincidence. This was the first proof that his impossible prediction was actually coming true. So the family decided they needed a fresh start. They moved away from Hexham when the twins were only a few months old, trying to escape the constant reminder of the tragedy. But as Gillian and Jennifer started to grow up, these really uncanny similarities started to appear. And I'm not just talking about looking like their sisters. It was something much deeper and much stranger. Okay, let's really zero in on this because the physical evidence here is just staggering. Jennifer, one of the twins, was born with 2 very specific marks. The first was a birthmark on her hip, identical in shape and location to one her older sister Jacqueline had. Okay, weird, but maybe a coincidence. But the second mark? This is the one that's a real mind-bender. A small, white, scar-like line on her forehead, in the exact same place Jacqueline had gotten a scar from a fall when she was 3. Think about that. A scar isn't genetic. It's not in your DNA. It's an acquired injury. So how on earth could it reappear on a newborn baby? And the physical marks were just the start. The girls started talking about things they could not possibly have known. Their parents pulled out a box of Joanna and Jacqueline's old toys, and the twins immediately knew which toys belonged to who. They even called the dolls by the same names, Mary and Susan, that their sisters had used. Then, on a trip back to Hexham, a town they hadn't seen since they were babies, they started pointing out landmarks, like that's our school, and even the location of a swing set in a park that had been removed years ago. It was just one impossible detail after another. And maybe the most haunting thing of all was this shared, intense fear of cars. The second they heard an engine start, they would fly into a panic, grabbing each other and screaming, "The car is coming to get us." It was this incredibly specific, traumatic echo of the accident that took their sisters' lives, an event their parents had been very careful never to describe to them in any detail. At this point, you might be thinking, this is a wild family legend, right? But the story of the Pollock twins got so extraordinary that it actually went from being a private family matter to a subject of formal academic research. It caught the eye of a scientist who would end up dedicating his entire career to investigating cases just like this one. And that scientist was Dr. Ian Stevenson. Now, let's be clear, this guy wasn't some fringe ghost hunter. He was the chairman of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Virginia. He approached these stories with extreme scientific rigor, trying to document and verify every single claim. And a case like the Pollocks, coming from a Western country where reincarnation isn't a common belief, was especially fascinating to him. You see, the Pollock case wasn't a total anomaly. It was part of a much bigger puzzle that Dr. Stevenson was working on. Over a span of 40 years, he and his team meticulously investigated and cataloged over 2,500 similar cases of kids from all over the world reporting past life memories. The Pollock twins' story was so well documented, it became Case 10 in his groundbreaking book on the subject. So what Stevenson did, which was really brilliant, was he organized the evidence into these clear categories. You had somatic, which was all the physical stuff, like Jennifer's birthmarks, then mnemonic, for the memories, the toys, the locations, and finally behavioral, which covered the phobias and personality quirks. And here's a crucial follow-up. Years later, he confirmed with blood test that the twins were in fact identical. That makes it even harder to explain why only one of them, Jennifer, had those specific marks. But of course, an extraordinary claim needs extraordinary evidence, right? So we have to look at this from every possible angle. And there are some pretty compelling psychological arguments that offer a completely non-paranormal explanation for everything that happened with the Pollock family. So let's put on our skeptics hat for a minute. If this wasn't reincarnation, what in the world could it be? Well, the answer might actually lie in the incredibly intense, grief-filled home that these twins were born into. Let's start with their father, John. We already know he had this incredibly strong belief that his daughters would return. That means he was psychologically primed to see evidence everywhere. A random birthmark, a kid saying something by chance. Through the lens of confirmation bias, every little thing becomes proof that reinforces what you already want to believe. And what about all that specific knowledge the twins had? Well, young kids are like little sponges, right? It's entirely possible they overheard their parents or their 4 older brothers talking about Joanna and Jacqueline, about their toys, their school, the accident. Cryptomnesia is a phenomenon where you absorb that information without realizing it, and then later it comes out as what you genuinely believe is your own memory. So when you put it all together, the skeptical viewpoint is that this was basically a perfect storm of psychological factors. You've got grieving parents, one of whom has this powerful belief, who might have accidentally guided their kids' memories. You've got this immense family trauma that created a deep, deep need for this connection to happen. And you have 2 very young, highly imaginative children. From this perspective, it's not a story about reincarnation, but a really tragic and complex story about a family trying to cope with an unbearable loss. And yet, even with all those strong, rational explanations, the Pollock case just refuses to be neatly explained away. Another strange detail is that, just like Dr. Stevenson saw in many of his cases, these memories all started to fade away when the twins turned about 5. They went on to live completely normal lives, with no memory of any of this. But the mystery they created is still here. And this right here is the real heart of it. You can explain away any one piece of the puzzle. The birthmark? Coincidence. A memory of a toy? They overheard it. The phobia? They picked up on their parents' anxiety. The real challenge, the thing that keeps this case so compelling, is explaining the clustering. Why did all of these things, the physical marks, the specific memories, the distinct behaviors, all converge on this one family at this one time exactly as their father had predicted? It's that pileup of evidence that defies any simple answer. We love diving into complicated stories like this one. If you find this kind of deep dive valuable, do us a favor and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It honestly helps us a ton and lets us keep making more of these for you. In the end, the Pollock twins leave us with this huge question that science is still trying to figure out. Is our consciousness, our memory, our very identity just the result of a bunch of neurons firing inside our skulls? Or, as this incredible story suggests, could it be something more? Something that might not be bound by the limits of a single lifetime? That's the puzzle at the very heart of this mystery.